one thing I noticed about that. The number two thing is the lower branches are really long.
You could allow some of your top to grow, and you could sculpt down the side.
And what do we mean by sculpt? Put that in terms of techniques we might apply.
Cut out some of the exterior branches so that you change the shape.
I couldn't have said it any better. We get these big disc-like caps on trees really commonly when they've been ignored. I have not had time not only to write blog posts, because unlike deciduous trees where you can cut them anywhere and they pop buds, we always need to cut a pine to where another branch comes out. So for example, we just talked about this. I can cut here and that'll be okay. I can cut here and I'd say that's a stupidly small amount to leave. But if I cut here, I might as well have cut that whole thing off because that's not gonna bud. I cannot count on that budding. Now, I'm going to look at the front and I'm going to get my eyes right where I hold the camera when I take pictures of trees. Free to find opportunities to reduce. And here's how I do that. I will handle a branch from underneath and I will imagine if I wire it, I will use just a finger or two, maybe one finger to get something out of the way, maybe a number finger to pull it. So I'm barely touching anything. And I'm just imagining if I had a wire on that branch, how far out would it stick from the middle of the tree? And then I will say, is this a reasonable length? I'm going to consider things like, how does that line compare with the branch below it? If the upper branch sticks out past the lower branch, that's no good, because that means that that's going to get shaded out. And so this is going to be a place to cut. So where do I cut this one? Right. And so if I were to cut it just half an inch, I'd be cutting right here. That's not going to grow, so I might as well cut there. And that didn't really shorten anything, it just kind of made it thinner. Well, if I still need to come back a little bit, I cut again. Half an inch, that's not going to grow. I'd say there's a small chance those two little buds will grow, and if I needed them, I would stop right there and leave it. But the reality is, I probably have to cut all the way back to this, where it comes out of another branch. Now, if I were to point that forward, same length. It didn't really do me any good. So again, if I cut half an inch, I get a stub. That stub's not going to grow. So I cut that away. Now, when I look at this branch, I think, okay, great. It's still just as long. And so you're always looking at where I wire the tree, how far is this thing going to stick out? And as I look from above, I imagine I look from above, what is the shape of the crown I want? I want it way here. And so I'm going to remove that branch all the way back to wherever the next side branch comes out, which happens to be all the way back there. So the process I just went through is the process you can use to teach yourself how to cut something back. What if I know it's too big? What if I just take a tiny bit off? Well, that won't grow, that won't grow, that won't grow, that won't grow. And so we ended up taking off that whole big branch. That's why in so many of these trees, I'm just walking up to you and say, well, yeah, well, you don't need that. And you just take off that whole thing. Because as long as there are some branches that are flexible that we can work with, it allows us to shorten. I'm going to want to cut off things like this, where there's big, long stretches with no side buds on them. Now, if there's nothing below that, I'm going to leave it, and that gives us options for maybe grafting in the future. When I do this kind of work, I tend to move the tree around a lot. If you work in one area too long, you will cut too much in that area. But it's the same thing. I'm going to imagine, were I to wire that down, that would be kind of ridiculously long. You don't have a lot to work with, but literally, if I cut 1 inch off the end, I might as well have cut all the way back to here, because there's no more than just one tiny bud there. And then if I wire this out, it's just as long as before. In this case, maybe I will cut back to a tiny little bud and keep that guy. Yeah, might as well leave it. And now you notice that the silhouette's way out here, and it kind of comes in a little bit here, and I think, great, get the heck away from there. Work somewhere else. And now I think, it doesn't mean you have to cut the next branch over, but it means you look. If I cut this back, it actually helps a lot, because if I cut this one branch here, we can look at this branch, if I can isolate it. All of these little branches in this area are all about the same length. And I think, perfect, I can make a nice little pad out of that. And if I wire them all down, they're actually going to be a whole lot longer. They'll be all the way out to there. So it'll fill what looks like a gap. same kind of thing here. The shape of the pad, I'm considering it from the top. I'm gonna cut the one that sticks out the furthest. And now those kind of make sense right there. And then we can get back to the question someone else asked where, oh, there is a little bit more to handle.
Can I break in for a second?
Yeah.
If we turn on the fan, I wanna know if it's too noisy for over here. Turn it on right now.
We might forgive it even if we can't hear it because it might be really comfortable and nice.
Let me know.
So this is a branch I would love to cut, but there'd be so little left. I want to keep it because you can't see it, but there's a teeny tiny little bud back there. I want that bud to get stronger before I cut that back. So we're going to stop right here, and then in fall, when that little bud's bigger, we can cut it back, and then it'll all be within that same silhouette. And we're just going to kind of do that kind of work all the way around the tree and see what are our worst offenders in terms of sticking out way too far. We're going to find big branches like this where you've got, if you stretch that all out, that's a very long distance with nothing green on it. There is no way to shorten this branch, although it's everyone can see. If you take off just a ½ an inch, you might as well have cut to there. And we did save that ½ an inch. But if I need 1 more inch, you're essentially killing that whole section. You might as well take the whole thing off. Does that one point make sense? That's of all the stuff I'm saying, that's kind of the only point to it. Is it scary to cut big branches like this?
Oh, yeah.
So overall, are you doing the apex correction on a gradual basis?
I'm doing the outer edge of the apex. I'm actually not touching this part because this is going to give us
Well,
height.
I was using a generalized thing, but I mean, are you doing this on a gradual basis? I mean,
Oh,
is this
right.
something that you're gonna whack the heck out of it in 1 2-hour setting, or are you gonna do it over a month?
So the way I've been thinking about that, and it's a good question, do I do this all at once? Am I always doing this? Or am I going to do a big wax session? And it sounds really funny for some reason. What we're going to do is, because this is so far out of whack, that I want to do some help now, and it'll set me up a little better for fall. Fall is when I want to do most of this work. I like doing this work when I'm wiring. And then that tells you kind of for sure whether or not you actually need the length or you don't need the length. But because I know we're way further than we need, I'm kind of just giving us a little bit of a break, which will give these needles more sunlight and make them stronger. So I'm thinking it more technically. A little bit off the top will give us a little more light here, make it easier in fall. And then in fall, we'll get really in there.
Yeah, fall.
Exactly.
I got you. Thank you very
Fall
much.
winter.
On that long branch that was very skinny, not lignified, is there a way to force back budding on that?
I don't know of ways to force pines to do things they don't want to do. Does anyone else have
It's
any
like my
suggestions for that? Similar, yes. Yeah.
So can we cut all this through there so we can also, yeah, there we go. Here.
Yeah, and so, see this whole branch here? This is such a great example. If this were wired out, I'm treating it a little rudely since it's about to get cut off. There are so many things wrong with this branch. We have this wonderful line of foliage, again, imagining the bird's eye view. And we've got a really nice even ring right at that point. This is well outside of that. It's easy to teach with obvious cases, right? Very convenient. But the other thing is, it's that same thing where I can't really shorten this branch much at all, and we do have 2 back buds here, but even these 2 back buds in this area are still 4 inches out from the next closer shoot. And so by getting rid of this whole thing, and to answer the next question that'll come up, yes, I leave small stubs when I cut for a couple different reasons. We now have much better line. And actually, whenever you see angles where branches go straight up, pull them down and you realize, wow, that's sticking out way further than I want. And now when that's wired, again, to handle from underneath, a very light touch, I realize that just that one wire there could actually bring it right back to where you want to be. I don't like keeping little teeny tiny buds on the end whenever possible if you have a good bud to cut to the good bud there. I'm sure there's more to do in this area, but some of the branches, there's not that much further back. You can't do everything at once. Oh, here's another good example. I don't know how you'll sit unless you're standing where I am. You don't want the pad shape to be like this. You want it to be more kind of fan or palm shaped. And sometimes you'll find pads that are kind of this shape, like that. They're super duper wide, like that. You'll know that's happening when whatever direction a branch, say I'm a trunk and this is a branch, whatever direction the branch starts growing in, you want the primary movement to be in that direction. In other words, if I start here, you don't want the branch to finish over there or over there. You want it to be in this general direction, here, here, or maybe over there. If a branch comes out and you see something come out at a right angle and go way over here just to fill in a little gap, that's what I want to get rid of. And so the branch starts in the middle, comes straight out to here, and at this point it makes a turn and goes way, way over past 2 branches over. I'm going to cut that out, and it would be the equivalent of a branch that was growing like this, and by cutting that out, it gives it a little more rounded shape. In a year, so I would do kind of a little more of this around the top, and a little more on this ring, a little more on the whole thing. This actually needs to come back quite a bit. I would probably want to take, I mean, I might as well just do a few cuts. This is just way, way too long down here.
There's nothing back there.
Well, there's all this.
You find this like a directional thing?
Yeah, and so I'll do that. So if I were to take this branch and imagine it wired, you can see we have a nice base, so up and down, I would either wire that one that sticks up off to the side if I need it wider, or if I don't need it wider, I can just cut it back to a little bud. It's pretty flat here. It's just kind of lumpy. We've got like tall, short, tall, short. If you need this whole pad to be smaller, one thing you can do sometimes is cut out the whole middle branch and then bend these two a little closer together, and then you have a really nice shape. And so there's all these good tricks for how we can make the pad smaller. If that's too big, the next cut would be right here. And now we have that. The maximum you could do, and that's a little extreme, is to here. I don't expect really to get too many back buds, but honestly, you can't see them, but there's actually a bud right here and a bud right there that might grow. And so those are your basic strategies for how you start bringing things back. Again, I tend to do a little bit just without even thinking about it as I'm going. It saves me from decantling and pulling needles. And then we do the rest of it fall when we wire. So that gets us to needle cutting, the last thing, or needle plucking, last thing to think about today. In general, when I'm done doing all the pruning and decantling, I want to get even numbers of needles everywhere. And so this is a bad example of needle plucking, but you can see that there are more needles here than there are in all the other spots. Ideally, at every single shoot, in other words, every little piece of this pine, we want the precise number of needles on every single branch on the whole tree. And this is, if just make a note on your calendar now, if you get tempted to come back in fall, I'm going to be telling you to count how many needles are on the end of every single branch, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to prune, and then I'm going to say, you, 5 pairs per branch, you, 8 pairs per branch. And I'm literally going to expect, yeah, you understand.
And this is regardless of length.
Well, I'm going to make, right, this is more like just how do we balance the resources in the tree. And so depending on how dense the tree is, I'm going to pick a number that makes sense for the right kind of foliar density for that tree. If this were at my house and it was perfectly healthy, I'd probably cut half of the remaining foliage off the tree. In general, in this country, we leave too much foliage on, which means the pines are too strong, which means when we decandle, the new shoots are too long, and that creates a lot of problems. If our technique is bad or inconsistent or the trees are unhealthy, we get really uneven growth. Welcome to most of the trees in this collection. That's super challenging and requires a lot more skill to kind of get out of that. And so as we go around, we'll wrap up these pines, and I might say, you know what, let's go in and make some cut back cuts, let's go in and pull some needles, and or let's put it on this bench and we'll just get another pine out to work on.
So Jonas,
I talked just long enough so the food coma set in right as
This is
I
perfect
how do you
timing.
make sure there's no more questions.
You would reduce that. I didn't have a sandwich, so I'll ask. Do you reduce that a third? You said.
To half. So again, on a pine this dense, I would probably keep no more than, if it were healthier than this. This isn't super healthy, but imagine this is in full health. I'd keep probably no more than 5 pairs of needles per shoot.
which time of year is here in this area with
5 pairs.
So the most foliage year round would be the day before you fall prune. And the second most foliage would be this morning. In other words, right before you decandle, right before you do the fall. Yes.
the hotel. He says that he's gonna okay.
So on.
So we'll start at the top.
Yeah.